Welcome to the His Side Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Wyant, and whether you're a Christian, church volunteer, or a leader, this podcast is for you. We'll break down cultural issues, church topics, and just like the angel of the Lord in Joshua chapter 5, we'll discuss His side. Well, hi and welcome. This podcast will be one of two format types, either a mini session like today, where I take some time and unpack what God says on one key issue, or a guest session where I take a little more time and I interview someone around a centralized theme. Today's mini session will explain how the podcast got its name. You see, I believe that the only way this crazy world makes even a little bit of sense is if you approach things from a biblical worldview. In short, I believe the Bible is the written, inspired Word of God and is vital in answering pivotal questions. Questions like, who are we? Why are we here? Does moral relativism work? I look at our country and I see questions like, when is a baby a human? Or, is there such a thing as gender? Our country is telling us that an 18-year-old is not emotionally stable enough to purchase a gun, but first graders are emotionally stable enough to teach them such concepts as gender dysphoria. These types of topics matter. Unfortunately, there seems to be much that confuses and divides us. You see, his side got its name from Joshua chapter 5. And to give us proper context, I'm going to do a brief overview of all the chapters leading up to that. So, right away in chapter 1 of Joshua, the Lord has chosen Joshua to be the new leader of Israel. He assures Joshua, just as he was with Moses, so shall he be with him. God instructs Joshua to meditate on the law and to do everything in it and to not turn from the right or to the left. Isn't it interesting? Even in our politics, we talk about things as though you're right of center or left of center. Head into the next chapter. Joshua sends two spies into Jericho. Isn't that interesting? Just like he watched Moses do, where Moses would send spies to survey the land, Joshua is now doing the same. Joshua once was one of the sent ones who, if you remember, gave the minority report about the promised land. Him and Caleb alone were positive in believing things through God's perspectives. God's perspective. So he does this again. He sends some spies, and spies find some refuge with a prostitute named Rahab. She tells them how afraid they all are of them and their God. You know, they are aware of how God parted the Red Sea and delivered the Israelites from the Egyptian army. Not just delivered them, but wiped out the Egyptian army. In addition to wiping out the Egyptian army, they're aware of the two Amorite kings across the Jordan. This is a very scary time for those living in Jericho. They're hiding behind their strong walls and terrified. In the next chapter, we see Israelite crosses the Jordan. And it's so interesting how God is not a respecter of persons. We see how, just like he did with Moses and parting the Red Sea, he does something unique with Jordan. And uh, it's not lost on me that really the Jordan is a reference for death. And here they are crossing over death, out of slavery, headed into the promised land. God gives Joshua specific instructions. He said, you know, I want you to carry my presence out there. I want you to get the Levite priests, and I want you to carry the ark, which represents God's power, God's spirit, God's presence. And just as the priests began to carry it in there and their feet began to touch the water, the riverbed recedes and dries. They carry the Ark of the Covenant into the center and they stay there. While they're doing that, Joshua has instructed a representative from the 12 tribes to each grab a stone. They go back over, they grab the stones, they begin to build a monument because they want to remember what God did for them in the past, what God did for them in the present, and what God will do for them in the future. You know, that's not just a memorial for crossing the Red Sea in that moment. It's something that'll allow descendants, the next generation, and the generation after that, to point to that and say, that is the God we serve. It's important to remember because just like Jesus told the disciples, "Hey, let's go over and let's cross the Sea of Galilee." He didn't say it was going to be easy. He didn't promise them that there weren't going to be storms. In fact, you had a lot of disciples that were very familiar with the waters, and as they gathered on that boat and they hunkered down, they were fearful of their life. But Jesus calmed the waters, and they made it to the other side. So here we are in the next chapter. At this time, the Amorite and Canaanite kings are freaking out. They saw what happened to the two previous kings. They saw how the Israel army has crossed the Jordan, and they don't know what's going to happen next. And Israel's getting filled with more and more confidence. At this time, I think it's significant. Joshua has the Israelite men get circumcised. I want to read something to you here. Because remember, God's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He's the same God in the Old Testament. He's the same God in the New Testament. In James chapter 4, verse 8, it says this: "Come close to God, and God will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world." So Joshua has drawn near to God. He's had the men, the leader of the Israelites. He said, "We're going to circumcise ourselves. We're going to make a covenant with God." And then now we're getting to the part where we come to the name his side. In Joshua chapter 5, verse 13 through 14, it says, "When Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up and he saw a man standing in front of him with a sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, 'Are you friend or foe?' 'Neither one,' he replied. 'I am the commander of the Lord's army.'" You know, there's been a couple of key moments early on in Joshua's leadership that I think the Lord speaks to him, and those words must just echo in his head. At the beginning of the book, Joshua, "Moses, my servant, is dead." And God's calling him to lead now. I bet those words, "Moses, my servant, is dead," were just echoing in his head. Here, Joshua, no doubt, was fearful. He looks up and suddenly he sees this scary figure. "Are you friend or foe?" he says in Joshua chapter 5. The response, "Neither one," he replied. "I am the commander of the Lord's army." I think that was ringing in his head, the commander of the Lord's army. When Jesus shows up, when he enters the room, things change. And this is a showing of Jesus, what's also known as a Christophany, where Jesus shows up in the Old Testament before he is um, birthed by Mary and begins to grow as a man and and fulfill his destiny for us and the purpose why God the Father sent him. So I look at this and I say, this is perfect for our present situation. You see, Joshua wanted to know, like so many of us, whose side is this person on? We're trying to constantly put people in a box or in a folder. Or you figure out how you want to organize your life. Are they Republican or are they Democrat? Are they a capitalist or a socialist? Do they wear a mask or don't they? Did they get vaccinated or did they not? Are they pro life or pro choice? Do they support gun restrictions or do they support the Second Amendment? Our United States of America is presently filled with all of these mini conflicts over a particular side. You see, I've created his side because I don't see any of these as either a friend or foe situation. In all of these issues, there is only one choice, and that is his side. And we should no longer look at people who support a different viewpoint as subhumans, and therefore a political opponent that is there to be defeated. When we do this as a society, we turn actual people into hate commodities and drag them over social media, and in many cases, try and hurt their livelihood. So, what do we do? Our society tells us we are typically one of two types of people in the midst of conflict: a fight or flight candidate. Either we shout down the enemy by name calling them or listing all the points and reasons why they, the one with the opposing view of ours, is wrong. Or we choose to flee. If it's a social media platform, we can mute that person or we can leave that platform altogether for another platform that supports and more coincides our ideologies and our viewpoints. When I look at the Bible to see how we as Christians are to behave, it is actually neither one. We're not called to isolate, but to infiltrate. And much like the book of Joshua, we can accomplish this by first surveilling the land. Say you move to a new town or school district, whether it's because of your job, your wife or husband's job. We move for many different reasons, right? And then what we need to do is we need to pray and we need to listen. The Bible says that we should be slow to speak and quick to listen. So let's say we move into that new school district. We observe, we volunteer, we join in and help, we establish relationships with people. You see, when someone actually sees you on a regular basis and knows you, they are much less likely to view you as subhuman if you disagree with a political point of theirs. See, at this point, I believe we have crucial choices to make. What will you do to help his side in your own life? There's always something you can do in your community to bring his side to the equation. Maybe you and a group of friends start conducting prayer walks around a school or a town square or a courthouse. Perhaps you can volunteer for field trips with a local school and begin to establish relationships with people of the opposing viewpoint who work at the school. Maybe you start coaching a sport. If you get a chance to read your younger students, bring in a book with a positive and quiet Christian message. See, not too long ago, there was a church that hired me as a consultant, and they were looking for ways to engage in the community. We were able to have good, positive conversations with the leadership of the school system. Started with the superintendent, worked with building principals, and eventually, on a regular basis, this church was sending volunteers, and they were called reading buddies, and they were going to help kids um, become better readers. They were struggling in many different content areas, and as many of you may know, it all comes down to how well you can read. If you can read, you can achieve. And so they were showing Christ's love. They weren't arguing over politics, and they weren't proselytizing. They came in, they may have picked books with positive Christian values and messaging, but they weren't proselytizing, and they weren't overtly trying to make people be like them. But instead, they were serving with love, establishing friendly relationships. I mean, that's what it's about. That's how you represent his side in a situation like that. Maybe you start coaching a sport. I've mentioned this before, but I've had a background in coaching, and especially if you get up into more competitive circles, um, parents, you might not want to hear this, but in many ways, kids will listen to a coach more than they'll listen even to their own parents. So you have tremendous opportunities for influence and to represent his side. If you get a chance, go for it. Be a positive and quiet Christian example in your area. I've talked a lot about a school setting, but maybe you're working in an office, a business, and you've got an opportunity to be someone that is known for listening, known for being a team player. Find out what people like. Maybe you become a guy that organizes Friday donuts in the coffee room, and if they're more keen on eating healthy, get some fresh fruit with something to drink. Coffee goes a long way. Good quality coffee, not just gas station coffee. In the show notes, there will be a list of positive ways to infiltrate the environment with action steps towards changing things for his side. I've mentioned several on this episode. Also in the show notes, there will be a link for you to email us at my company, 13 Consulting. We want to hear from you. Tell us if you find any of our ideas helpful in making change for his side. I would love to read on the podcast ways that you applied a strategy and the Lord helped you fight for his side and brought change to your neck of the woods. Lastly, I would love to hear how God used you to bring resolution to conflict in your area of influence. This has been a season, it's been unprecedented in my lifetime of how divisive we've gotten, with the pandemic and the way social media algorithms work where they just want you to stay mad so you stay on their platform longer and they get more ad revenue. They don't care about you. It's just about making you angry and you choosing sides, right? I would love to hear how you brought resolution to conflict in your area because that's the kind of mission that Christ calls us to. Because one thing is true, not everyone has the same level of influence, but everyone does have influence. And we want to hear how you're fighting for his side. Until next time, I'm Joshua. Thank you for listening, and God bless.